Unknown 9 Awakening is the first of a collection of multimedia projects ranging from novels to audio dramas. As an intro to the wider Unknown 9 universe, Awakening builds intrigue and sets up the world building quite nicely, while acting as a standalone game experience in its own right. And it's worth mentioning off the bat that this is a very gamey video game and not at all a narrative walking sim like some previews might suggest. The story of Haroona and her journey to avenge her mentor and accept her newfound abilities is rather well told and cinematic. The general vibe and genre of Unknown 9 is a blend of the swashbuckling escapades of something like Uncharted, with the more conspiratorial aspects of something like Metal Gear. Throughout the course of Unknown 9, you'll encounter secret societies, journey through the jungles of India, and tap into the fabric of reality using Haroona's Umbral abilities. Earlier, I mentioned how the game is cinematic, and while it has the framework and elements of a blockbuster film, it doesn't overly rely on rendered cutscenes to tell its story. Most of the story is told through character dialogue and in-engine scenes, and while I do appreciate the occasional scenes, there's some awkward transitions here and there that gave me scripting whiplash, as it were. 1 minute we're arguing on the airship, the next we're abruptly searching through a jungle by ourselves without context. These jarring scene transitions aren't prominent through the experience, but you'll notice them when they do occur. By contrast, the dialogue between characters is well written. There's a subtlety and wit here that reminds me of classic BioWare at times. Nowhere is that better reflected than through companion conversations aboard your airship hub. You'll be introduced to the airship a couple of levels into the game, returning to it after every other level to interact and catch up with the crewmates. It was in these moments aboard the airship, getting to know all of the companion characters, where I enjoyed Unknown 9 the most. The crew aboard the airship have updated dialogue every time you return after an outing, in true Mass Effect Normandy fashion. I find the characters' personal stories and personalities to be a highlight of the game, despite the protagonist's more abrasive and untrusting persona. I wish I liked the protagonist of Unknown 9, Haroona, as much as the rest of the cast, but even by the end of the narrative, her standoffish distrust and arrogance didn't really evolve or charm me. That said, Haroona, just like the rest of the cast, have a well-developed backstory that informs their motives. Characters like the quirky navigator trying to get Haroona to listen to opera, or the casual and likable NPC reminiscing on his time in the American Civil War continued to be the highlight of the whole experience for me, prompting me forward even when other parts of the game kept trying to get me to quit. More on this in a bit. As for plot, it follows a more or less traditional structure. The protagonist realizes their potential after losing their mentor and gets embroiled in a wider scheme as they join a ragtag resistance group. I could see some of the plot twists a mile away, but everything is well told and presented with sincerity, so I didn't mind when it stepped into those tropes. While we're on the subject of things Unknown 9 does well, exploring the babbles and furnishings within the airship is a delight thanks to the variety of doodads and scatterings of collectible hidden lore throughout. I enjoy the exploration in general, whether it be in the jungles of India or the subterranean caves hiding secrets of mysterious artifacts. Environments are rendered with a high attention to detail, which is helped by the game's superb graphical quality and dynamic lighting. You really get a sense of the dampness of the Indian forests and the dry heat of the desert locations, but facial animations aren't nearly as great. Facial animations look stilted, almost like they're placeholders, which is an unfortunate contrast to the wonderfully textured and detailed environments. While I thoroughly enjoyed my time exploring the dense jungles and Victorian mansions, the same can't be said for the game's combat. We'll start with what I do like about combat first. Much of the game's early combat scenarios involve sneaking through tall grass to overcome foes through stealthy back attack assassinations and ranged tampering of explosives through the crush ability. You can even throw psychic stones to distract enemies and use a psychic peek ability, which acts as a survey lens to see enemies and interactables through objects. I rather enjoyed these early stealth-oriented sections of the game and favor them to the more direct tanky approach the latter sections necessitate. Integral to most encounters is Haroona's step ability, which grants control of an opponent for a limited time, allowing you to attack other enemies or set off explosives. Step is particularly useful when overwhelmed by large groups, something that happens far too often halfway through the game. While I do like the kit available to Haroona, the abundance and size of the enemy encounters halfway in the game don't accommodate her Umbric abilities very well. Haroona is no tank, and your occasional combat companion barely does anything to help you overcome your foes, making a majority of the latter encounters feel tedious and mismatched. Sure, you have a magical shield with parries and a brief invisibility cloak to try to evade potential disaster for a time, but there's only so much you can do when there's devices that restrict those abilities in tandem with heavy, mini-boss enemies. Take Gearheads for instance. Your first encounter with a Gearhead is awful, as you have no defensive terrain to hide behind nor tall grass to fall back to. Worst of all, you can't use step on Gearheads, rendering your most valuable tool worthless. So many of these fights whittle down to clunky melee bouts where your coolest Umbral abilities are taken away, and there's a tad too many of them considering how emphasized the stealth and Umbral abilities are in general. It doesn't help that the number of bugs increases as more opponents get thrown at you. I've had several instances where I couldn't jump across gaps because my character was stuck in a combat animation, resulting in a swift death. I've also been stuck in terrain during certain fights. Unknown 9 is at its worst during large group battles with heavy opponents that restrict certain Umbral powers. The melee in this game isn't great due to inconsistent lock-on and vague punch hurt boxes. Yet the second half of the game insists on overwhelming you with these waves of kinds of enemies. Repetitive melee-based encounters aren't the only hiccup in Unknown 9's gameplay though. Character dialogue and banter often get cut off when progressing or triggering an encounter. In a different vein, companions often nag on you to hurry up, repeating their demand incessantly until you follow the main path forward. This nagging really discourages exploration, which, as I stated earlier, is one of the game's best qualities. I was especially annoyed when being yelled at for not progressing the main story aboard the airship. I wanted to hear all the companion dialogue and explore the wonderful environment, so why doesn't the game want me to? Some other slight annoyances are the absence of performance or graphic modes on the PS5. I was stuck with the game hovering around 40 FPS, with frames getting choppier during some of the overwhelming group fights. Oh, and you cannot change difficulty after you start the game, so select between the 4 difficulty settings wisely because you're stuck with it. I really was beginning to fall for Unknown 9 Awakening as I approached the midway part of the narrative, but then the game insisted on me going melee and threw repetitive enemy encounters at me like it forgot what makes it tick. The game shines in its exploration moments, and especially so when conversing with the crew aboard your airship. The game's combat works well when it encourages stealth and allows you to use your Umbral abilities without abandon, making me question why they threw enemy waves at you like they do during the second half of the game. The story and world building are a treat though, and you're bound to find 1 or 2 characters to grow attached to throughout your time in Unknown 9's world. I'll be interested to see the related projects within the Unknown 9 universe, since Awakening has shown promise with its world building, despite its gameplay irritations. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell. And let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.